Here at Taboo Education, we aim to get our communities talking about death. However, I've noticed when I say that, it appears many people believe I simply mean talking about their own death. And while that is certainly part of it, and a very necessary part, it's not the only part. We need to be talking about others' deaths, both loved ones and strangers, body disposal options that affect entire communities, how we interact with and think about dead bodies, the medical and legal options that are available and those that need to start being available, and how to talk to others about the concept and practicalities of death. Because only thinking about yourself doesn't get shit done. It doesn't make a change, and you may need that change in the future. Now, every video we've created highlights a particular need to talk about death, but I thought putting them all in one video might make a bigger impact and something to show your in-death denial family and friends. Now, heads up, please subscribe, like, and share this video. It really helps it get seen by the YouTube algorithm so more people can view it. So let's talk why we need to talk about death. Now, this list will not include all the reasons we need to talk about death, only 10, because top 10s do better on YouTube. We will certainly be doing another list in the future, and probably another one after that. Now, onwards. Death denial and anxiety impedes grief. While hard to quantify, it is estimated that grief lasts twice as long for someone who was not accepting of death in the first place. Which makes sense, right? You can't make sense of complex algebra if you haven't got your mind around basic math. If you haven't accepted that death in general is natural and normal, you won't be able to accept that your loved one has died, no matter the cause. There is usually that one person at every funeral going, "I just don't understand why he had to die," because he was 94 years old and been suffering dementia for the last 15. Now, all this is to say that accepting the reality of death isn't going to make you immune to feeling the loss of a loved one. Of course it's not. But you are going to have the basic foundations of which you can use to come to terms with that loss. You are not prepared for the future. If you're in your 30s, 40s, you've likely got a couple of kids, you're paying off your mortgage or rent, you're at least in a solid point in your career, what happens if that fairy tale falls apart? If you and your partner are in a fatal car crash tomorrow, what happens to your kids? Do you assume that your parents will take them on? This whole, "I'm in my 30s, I'll be fine, I'll look into that later" thing suddenly ain't gonna hold up. You may feel uncomfortable talking about it, but you chose to have those kids, so you damn sure better have a solid plan for what happens with them if you're gone. Suck it up, buttercup, it's time to write that will and talk to those around you. Impedes our humanity. Not talking about death and seeing death regularly makes us feel like death is not regular. While in the back of our head we know we die, in the front we think it's unnatural. And it is this that leads so many people to believe that any life is better than no life. Now, if something traumatic happens to them, that's fine. If that's what they wish, then that's what we do. The problem is when they are the loudest person in the room speaking for someone who cannot speak. Those suffering with dementia, the terminally ill, those in a coma, or those who have been determined to be brain dead. Most people agree that if we were in that position, we would want someone to not extend our suffering and to go as peacefully as possible. And yet, those who believe that any life is better than no life are willing to let their loved ones suffer because they can't come to terms with death being acceptable. Many members of the medical profession have stories of the inhumanity that they have witnessed because of this. The "why don't I know what they want" guilt. On the flip side to the previous point is those people who really want to do the right thing but just never had the conversation. Medical staff say it's most common in people that are around my age, whose parents are aging, and when it gets to the point that medical decisions need to be made, they realise they've never talked about this with their parents before, and now it's too late to have that conversation. This could have been because of their own anxieties or because of their parents, but at least it's the same problem. And that's the kind of guilt that stays with a person. Abandoning the terminally ill. Okay, last point on the dying issue itself, I promise. We've said it in many videos previously, and God knows I've cut it out of so many videos. And everyone has that one particular thing that they see regularly in their profession that pisses them off, something chronic, and this is mine. People abandoning the terminally ill because of their own death anxiety. It blows my mind that husbands, wives, parents, children, long-term friends suddenly throw their hands up in the air and go, "You're on your own." And I'm not the only one. Ask any hospice staff member or palliative care nurse, they'll tell you. Now, before you all get up in arms, let's be clear about the kind of person that we're talking about here. That husband who has 2 kids and expects his wife to do everything while he goes out and parties with his mates, we're not talking about him. That friend that always has to have the attention on her, we're not talking about her. Why? Because these people are straight up assholes, and anyone in their right mind would have seen this coming. That's a whole separate issue right there. Also, we're not talking about the kids whose parents are now terminally ill, but were abusive pieces of shit all their lives. Fair play to them, that's called karma. No, we're talking about those people whose fear of death is so overwhelming that they put that in front of supporting their loved ones in their time of need. And if that isn't a problem in our society that needs to be addressed, I don't know what is. It affects politics. We've mentioned in our videos about wills, advanced care directives, voluntary assisted dying, cemeteries, body disposal options. The issue that stops these things from working efficiently or getting off the ground at all is policy and legislation. Politicians don't want to shake things up. It's why our Australian political landscape always looks to the UK or US to try everything first and see how it works out. All these topics I just mentioned affect every one of us. And as a country with an ageing population issue and a strong leaning towards environmentalism and sustainability, you would think that it would be in a politician's best interest to bring these issues up. But we as a society at large just don't want to hear about it. So talking about this would be bad news at the polls. And if we as a society are having anxiety about death, I think we can safely say that the politicians themselves would also have anxiety about death. They are human beings after all. And changing policies takes a lot of research, discussion, and debate, and that's a lot of thinking about something that you don't want to be thinking about, which means things won't change. Environmentally friendly body disposal options won't be implemented, wills being uploaded into a single safe portal won't happen, advanced care directives will continue to be disputed, and voluntary assisted dying laws won't be upgraded. Healthcare workers. There is a lot of irony within the healthcare system, and as someone who knows many healthcare workers, it's such a bizarre trend. Many healthcare workers, and by that I mean doctors, nurses, paramedics, technicians, etc., have extreme death anxiety, which, without them meaning to, affects their work with patients. The term trauma junkie circulates a lot. They are all for dealing with blood and guts and gore, but as soon as the patient is declared dead, they don't want anything to do with them. Additionally, there is a strong anxiety about talking about death, attending funerals, and anything that brings to light that part of life. So not only are they struggling with it themselves, but it affects the way they communicate with patients and their families, particularly the terminally ill or those with fatal trauma injuries. And we can't have that in our healthcare system. It has to change. It's just bad news for everyone. Young people not understanding the consequences of their actions. This was brought up strongly in our Talking to Kids About Death video in regards to teenagers and their romanticisation of death and the very real consequences that stem from this. So please go check that one out after this, particularly the first half where I very bluntly lay out why you need to talk to not only your kids but your teenagers about death and what it looks like. People make bad choices when they're not given all the facts, and without doing your job as a parent and informing them of these facts, they will go get their information from elsewhere, like the internet or movies, which are full of facts. You're more susceptible to manipulation. Fear and denial about anything leaves you open to manipulation. Those who want to manipulate you will find your weak points and use them against you. But we're in Australia, I hear you say. There's not many shady people here. It's not like other places. Now, I hate to burst your very naive bubble you got going on there, but your fear and denial of death leaves you open to manipulation by many, mainly the media, parts of the funeral industry, religion, unethical business practices, cults and scam artists. They use your fear and reluctance to inform yourself about such issues for their own gain. Environment. This is probably the most simple point. While people do not want to talk about death, there will be no changes made to our funeral, burial or body disposal practices. With our country's love of all things environmentally friendly and sustainable, you would think that these advocates would be screaming louder about this. But no. Usually their death anxiety overrides their want to advocate for the environment. Or they're so young that since they've never seen death, it doesn't occur to them that it's an issue at all. We said this in our video about Australian cemeteries and how we're out of space for burial. and that we need better options. We need people to start jumping up and down about the environmental damage our current cemetery practices and cremation practices are causing, in the same way that they're jumping up and down about deforestation, climate change and plastic straws. But this won't happen until our society as a whole gets over its death anxiety. Many people will say these points don't affect them, but they probably will in the future. They'll say, we'll deal with that then. But by then it's too late, you're already stuck with how it is. Death anxiety and denial has a unique way of affecting everything in our lives in one way or another. Sometimes subtly, sometimes very openly. What issue do you see around you that could be solved by our society being more open about death? Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe if you found this interesting. Now go talk death.